Welcome to Rock Your Talk with Leisa Reid. I am Leisa Reid, excited to be here with our guest, Jena Rodriguez. Welcome, Jena. How are you?
I'm amazing. So good to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
We are going to be talking about the ego. So if you've been suffering from egomania, or maybe you don't even know that you're suffering from egomania, you probably are, because I think we all are. But Jena's going to share with us, like, you know, how does the ego trick us, and how do we overcome that? So she's got some really, really great expert tips. Cannot wait to get started. Also, as I always share, there's a couple of gifts I want to share with you as our listeners. As the founder of Get Speaking Gigs Now, I work with speakers and I help them learn how to get booked, stay booked, and attract their clients through speaking. And if you are one of those people who's like, I would love to be a speaker, then you're going to want to check out GetSpeakingGigsNow.com and go get your 5 top tips to get more speaking gigs, because you got to start somewhere, right? I got a lot of great tips for you there. In addition, I'm also a trainer and speaker for productive learning, and that's where we dive into some deep personal development work. And we have a free course that I want to offer you at productivelearning.com. It's called New Thinking for New Actions. How many times have you known where you're like, oh, I want this new thing, this new result, but you realize, wait, if I don't change my thinking about it, then I'm not going to get different results, different actions. So, but how do I do that? So we kind of back it all up, we back it up, and then give you some tips and tools in order to start doing that. So that's another gift for you at productivelearning.com/gift. All right, so let's get into our egomania with amazing Brave Master founder, Jena Rodriguez. Jena, tell us a little bit about you. I mean, I know you because we've known each other, but a little bit, but tell the listeners about you and what magic you're putting out into the world.
Yes, thank you. That's so amazing. All the gifts that you're giving, that's amazing. So for those of you new to me, I'm a transformational mentor and growth strategist with Brave Masters, my company. And I'm also the creator of the ego tricks, the egoic archetype, which you're going to hear all about, and the detachment method, which is a powerful process to reduce the egomania that you were talking about. You bring it down, and I'm happy to share today what I call the rest in peace, the RIP of egomania.
I love that.
So we're going to walk through a few steps to kind of outsmart the ego. We all have one. It's present, it's purposeful, it's purposeful, it's our protector, but I believe we've given it way too much power, and it really hijacks our momentum towards what we really want. So just like you were saying, the next level, that next thing requires new thinking. Yes, I believe that as well. I believe you have to become something different, something more more conscious in order to have what you say you want. Otherwise, we'd already have it. Right?
Yeah.
We'd already have
it's like you have an Uber driver who's just driving you around randomly wherever they want. You're like, well, Uber drivers are good, but you want to make sure and tell the driver where you want to go. So
that's right.
I think that's kind of like how our ego can operate if we're not bringing in that consciousness. So I can't wait to hear your tips on how to do that. What's your first tip for us?
Yeah, let's dive in. So number 1, of course, is recognize the ego trick, as I call it. There's 14 ego tricks that I've identified, and I'll give you full access to all of them. But if you'll recognize a few. A big one is fear. So any fear, you've got a trick going on. Another one that's really big, especially for entrepreneurs like us and speakers, right, is the requirement, meaning it has to be this way. It has to look this way. So there's this requirement that we put in place. And if it falls any short of that, then we are suffering in some way, right? So there's a requirement. It's an expectation. It's like, this is how it's got to be. So that one gets pretty tricky. And another one I love to bring up is the HW3 trick, which is how, what, when, where. So this is when you're attached and highly, expectant, and, it's like, I've got to know how to do it. Got to figure it out. Like, I'm a figure it out girl, right?
Yeah.
I got to know when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen and all of those HW3s. So that's a signal. So the whole point of the tricks is to recognize your tricks that you're playing, and more importantly, to understand which egoic archetype is. So I'll give you a quiz that you can figure out which one of 4 really is your predominant go-to. We use them all. We have to use them all. The ego's getting smarter and smarter, and we educate it all the time. And so we have to outsmart the ego by getting clear and recognizing which tricks we're using, so that then we can go in internally and do some of the work to release that ego trick, and to calm it down, calm that mania down. And so that's tip number one, is recognize the ego trick and know your archetype.
I can imagine, especially if you're out there listening and you haven't actually had a chance to really dive into like kind of what's going on in your own mind. And I know for me, with the work that I've done, even when you say the ego trick of fear, I'm like, that itself is such a large category, because it can be, I like how you use the word trick, because fear doesn't always show up the way we think it's supposed to, or it's like, well, I'm not scared. I mean, I'm here, you know what I mean? Like, it could, it's not a big deal. I'm not going to do it. You know, like, so fear can be super, well, any of them, I am sure, can be disguised. And so knowing what that looks like for you as an individual, like for me, I want to be aware of, which I think is what you're saying. Like, I want to be aware of, how does fear trick me? How does it show up for me, so that I can catch it easier and recognize it and then make a different decision? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is kind of my job, right? Is when I work with people, I'm looking for the nuances. I'm looking for the subtleties, because it's so unconscious. And the thing that I speak to, especially if you take the quiz, then there's an email on the back end that will actually cover what I call the deflection responses. So that's in my opinion, that's what you're speaking to, is the deflection response is the behavior that then indicates that there's a trick going on. And so like fear is the deflection response is to procrastinate, avoid, don't have that hard conversation. Make it okay, right? I'm okay. I don't need that. I don't need that, right? That's deflect. And so you're correct. Fear is like a really tricky one. And every time I'm like, what are you afraid of? They're like, I'm not really afraid.
I'm not afraid.
Yeah, it's like immediately the ego wants to completely deflect that answer. And it's usually like worry, or I'm concerned, or you can use whatever umbrella you want to use. But the bottom line is that there's something that you're past projecting. The way I define fear is that we're past projecting and future tripping. So we're not present in the now. We're worried about something in the past, or some imaginative past. I mean, it doesn't even have to be our own reality.
True, right.
Is projected either on our present or on our future. And then we start future tripping all the what ifs, right? It's like, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And then it just completely paralyzes us. So the deflection response is exactly what you're speaking to. And I speak to that a lot, because that's where the nuances come in. It's kind of like, what does it really look like? And everybody's a little different, but I watch a lot of patterns. I look at all the patterns of human behavior, and mine and many others. And it's like, it falls into some pretty steady, categories. So I'm able to help people to kind of outsmart their ego, like figure it out, right?
Very good. Yeah, that's so powerful. Very, very good.
Yeah.
And then what do you do next after that? So you
number two, number two, the rest in peace process here. I just made that up, by the way.
I love that.
So we recognize, right, the first one, and the second is to identify the underlying attachment. So what I believe is that so the ego trick is the signal. It's just a signal. Hey, red flag. And then the source of that ego trick is some form of what I kind of blanket, call an attachment of some sort. And that means that we're attached to a belief system. We're attached to an expectation. We're attached to, something emotionally suppressed, which then we're not even aware of it, right? And so attachments, like basically, if you're attached to an outcome, attached to a story, a narrative, a belief, a relationship, if you're attached to something, and it's like, if that goes away and the ego's believing, what the ego's believing is that it's not okay, that it's not enough, that it's not safe. And so its whole job is to help us try to overcome that, but we're giving it way too much power. So the second step is to identify what is the actual attachment. And the good news is that's the first step of my detachment method, and it walks you through that. But if you don't know what's the source of the ego trick, the ego just keeps doing and behaving and reacting. And what I say is the ego is the reactor and the higher self is the responder. And we want to get into response versus reaction.
Right.
More frequently. And if we can just shift it's kind of like tip the scale. Like if you're living in egoic tricks and egoic behavior 90% of the day, right? It's just you're thinking and over analyzing and you're in your head all the time. That's a signal that you're in your egoic behavior all the time. And we want to tip that scale. Maybe we live at 60% higher self. We're a lot more calmer, peaceful, forgiving, of ourselves and others. And in order to tip that scale, we have to bring things to our consciousness and make that, and I love giving tools that make that easier, right? So
yeah, it's really hard to do if you aren't even aware of it. How would you change it, right? It's like
100%.
So there's this and we're so used to just kind of doing things the way we do. Like there's this story about the two fish in the water. It's like the older fish swims by and it's like, hey kids, how's the water? And they're like, what water? And we're just literally in this water. We don't feel it, see it, taste it here, we're just in it. And so when you start to dive into work like this, it's deep and so powerful. And then you'll start to see your, I know for me, and probably you as well, your massive shifts in your life. And it's funny because the massive shifts come from the subtleties that you're talking about, from the tiny little choice points that we have, all these choice points that we could make throughout our day, from, what time do we get up in the morning and how does that work? And what, how did we end up late? How are we on time? What did we decide to do? What did we put off? What did we do? We're like a trillion choices.
Right.
And so it sounds like what you're saying is right in alignment with like what we talk about at Productive Learning too. It's like this increasing your level of choice point and consciousness of like, oh, if I make this choice, is that going to lead me towards where I want to go? Or if I make that choice, my old choice, is that going to kind of bring me back,
bring you in the cycle
to this other area that I'm trying to, move through? But it's a big conversation. Like it's not,
it ain't 15 minutes, but we're getting to the high level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
exciting.
lifetime. Yeah, it's a lifetime, process. I always say, my commitment anyway is to be a practitioner of life, not just a student.
Yes.
And that has been since I was a teenager, and I came from a really, tough upbringing, from divorce to domestic violence for 5 years. I moved out at 14. There was drug and alcohol abuse in the household, for that period of time. And, and it's just like choices, right? I look back at my life and I go, I was a victim of that for a long time. It was like, woe is me. Why is this happening to me? All of that. I lived through that phase, but there was another side of me there. My higher self would kick in every so often and go, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else. And I know I'm meant for something bigger than this. This is just circumstantial, but I don't know how to get out of it. So I started studying personal development and transformational work as a teenager. I'm like, how do I change my life? Well, first you got to get aware of how life works and how your mind works and how your egoic identity works and trusting that the universe is supporting you in some way. And that has been a lifetime practice for me because I was in such a massive need for control, right?
You're like hardwired from the get-go of like having to unwrap. I guess I can see where you're saying like the attachment, like we're hardwired, then that's attached to that. And you're talking about detachment. It's like, how do I kind of loosen those neural pathways and like create new ones and like, oh, wow, actually I like this blend much better. Like, how do I create something completely new when I'm so used to being locked in for so long? That's we all have that to different degrees, right?
100%. Yeah. And I think that's, for me, I remember actually making the commitment to live a conscious life. And because the alternative was unconscious and numb and victim. And I was like, I'm just not going to do it. That's not me. And so you got to make that commitment. You got to, be aware that there is a difference, between the life is happening to me versus it's happening for me. Like we hear that a lot, hopefully. And I do believe that we create our experience of life. And if that's true, then taking personal ownership is like step one, right? Like I have to own everything I've chosen up to this moment, everything that's occurred in my life, no matter how ugly it is, and, you know, and then just know that it's there and it's present and it's teaching us something, and then do the work. And so that's what I'm here to do, is obviously offer tools and hopefully simple things. I'm a strategic person. So it's like, what practical things can I give people to figure this, you know, behavioral, you know, stuff out, because it's simple but complicated, right? We're
Yeah,
complicated
yeah.
humans.
It's like anybody could do it, but not everybody does it, you
100%.
know? And I love what you were saying about, if I were to sum it up, it's kind of like the act of taking responsibility for whatever you have in your life is for like your company, Brave Masters. It's like, yeah, that does take bravery, because it's easier. It seems like it's easier to blame everybody else and have everyone else change and everyone else in the circumstances change. And we always say, if we had a workshop where we could make other people change, it'd be like $1 million workshop, right? But like, we don't have that workshop because it doesn't exist. It's not gonna work.
Darn it.
Shucks.
You and I would be
I
millionaires.
know, it'd be so much
Not one
easier
idea.
if everybody else would change, but they're not going to. So
Right.
we start with, yes. I love that I love what you advocate and what you teach. It's so needed. So needed.
Thank you. Yeah, living consciously is not the easy way, it's the brave way. That's my quote.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so
That's how I see it.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. That
Brave.
hashtag 1,000,000%. Yes.
Hashtag Brave Master. And so I'll give you the third step really quickly, and that is the P, right? Pattern break, right? You got to break the patterns. And after you've recognized your ego tricks, identified the attachments, and then you have to reset. You have to create new truths. You've got to create, you know, new intentions, and you got to take new action. And like you were saying, which I thought was brilliant, is like, you know, that new thought and new action, right? You've got to understand yourself and your, you know, your unconscious ways, what I call it, bringing unconscious above the line into your consciousness.
Yes.
So that you can choose more freely and more intently and consciously, of course. So when you pattern break, I think it's a matter of, I do a lot of journaling, and I do a lot of you know, reflection and introspection and all of that, because in order to break those patterns, we have to know where we are and know where we're trying to go. And then, you know, it's like you said, untether and dismantle and uncover and release all of the emotional blocks that might be in the way. I think we have a lot of trauma and emotional suppression held in our bodies. And, you know, and we think it's all mind work, but for me, it's emotional intelligence. So when we can drop down into the emotional work and really uncover what's holding us back, then we can break those patterns much more frequently, and, you know, not necessarily easier, but it takes work. That's the Brave Master, right? But it doesn't have to be so scary. I think people are, especially right now, there's a lot of anxiety going on. There's a lot of stress, and people think it's the circumstance. And for me, anxiety and such is a buildup of emotional suppression, and it just keeps building. So a circumstance come into your life, then you react to it. You just added another layer to the previous, you know, unresolved emotional suppression. So I think those are kind of the three tips. Recognize your ego tricks and your archetype, identify the attachments that are underneath the source of those, and then start to pattern break, you know, by doing setting new intentions and taking new action. So
I love that. Yeah, it's so important. And I am so grateful that I started this journey, you know, probably about 12 years ago, I would say, of really diving in. I've always been into self-development and growth, but a lot of times it was more a solo, you know, reading books and things like that. I had done some coaching and therapy and different workshops over the years. So I was always attracted to that. But when I really started to dive in and make it a part of my regular practice is when things really shifted for me. And I could really relate to what you were saying about the numbness. Like for a long time, I was like, well, I'm fine, you know, because I wasn't feeling really anything. I was like my feelings would be like in this, you know, kind of medium threshold. If I know people aren't always watching the video, so I've like got my hands, you know, like whatever.
Describe your
I can't
hands right
describe
now.
how I'm using my hands right now, but and so opening up my emotional threshold to then, because if you're not willing to feel heartache and pain and loss and sadness and anger, you also are limiting the amount of joy and love and elation and, you know, glee and so forth. So that's an ongoing process. It's not like you just go like, you know, this weekend, I'm just going to open up my whole emotional threshold and
Let all that go.
by Monday, I'll be completely different. You're like, well, no, it's just like inching it up. It's, you know, just getting it open. It's kind of like wearing your braces, you know, it's like a little bit of Invisalign for your emotions or whatever.
Takes a few years.
Takes a little adjusting. Yeah, a little adjusting along the way. So
yeah, amazing.
And I'm still work in progress over here. We
forever are. And I think that's my commitment to myself. Obviously, that's where it started, was my willingness to like live consciously, not unconsciously. And yet it's been challenging, of course, and it's not the easy way. That's why that's my quote, right? It's not necessarily the easy way, especially this year has been challenging for many, and we just want to hide under the covers.
Yeah.
That's the numbing out that we all want to do, you know, or we want to eat it, or we want to drink it, or we want to sleep it away, or, you know, and those are all part of the ego tricks that we're using to try to cope. And I think if we can prove to ourselves, our higher self has us supported. It's there to support us. We are safer than we believe. We are enough, you know, all of those basic things that we all struggle with. And I just am here to hopefully create that emotional revolution that we all need.
I love that. Emotional revolution. Love it. Hashtag emotional revolution.
Yes.
Add that to the list. Yeah, agreed. And I think if anything now more than ever, this is some work that I've done in the past as well, but feeling like there's a sense of certainty, like, oh, well, you know, now we'll describe these times as uncertain times. Listen, it was always uncertain times. It's always going to be uncertain times. Yeah. It's just, we have this like myth of certainty of like, oh, I know what's going to happen tomorrow. We actually do not know.
We never know.
So, but that button gets pushed a little bit more when it's like so glaringly all these changes in our face. We're like, oh my gosh. And that gets triggered and the fear comes, all the things come up.
Yes.
And we're grasping for our society is like grasping for certainty when there's not any anyway, but you know, an adjustment and a time when people like you are a real asset to our community, because gosh knows we can use all the help we can get, right? The more consciousness we have in this world, the better. We
can rise above the noise, right? Yes. There's so much noise going on. Yes. Stop watching the news, people. You know, it's just noise, and it feeds that's why we all have an ego. And notice how news, for example, their whole purpose is to feed the thing that we all have, which is that egoic, you know, self. Yeah. And if we can be more conscious, then we can rise above all that. We can thrive in times of uncertainty, and which is always, and, you know, and really find ourselves in the process, you know, and I think be witness to our resilience that's already there. Like, we are resilient human beings. We just need to own it.
Oh yeah, totally. And then I know you were mentioning you can give everyone access to the tell us about that. How do they?
Yeah, the quiz. Well, the quiz kind of is like, it covers everything. It'll give you everything that I've mentioned. So if you go to bravemasters.com/quiz, it takes a free quiz. It's like 6 questions, very simple. And then on the back end of that, number one, it'll give you the result of you're either your archetype is either the realist, the martyr, the illusionist, or the rebel. And none of them mean anything worse or bad or good or anything like that. It's just a little title. It's just an identifier, because inside of those archetypes are the predominant ego tricks that you go to. So my primary is the realist, and then I'm kind of my secondary right behind it is the rebel. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we use all of them. But once you know what that is, and it gives you a little video to watch. Then you can download the ego tricks and the detachment method as well. So it's kind of all in one step. And like I mentioned, if you follow along the email sequence, all right, it'll share with you the deflection responses, the payoff perception that happens, and just really give you that insight into how our behavior hijacks our momentum when our ego's in charge. And so definitely check that out. And I know we talked about this before. My YouTube channel is another great place to go. It's got tons of just free videos about all this and different conversations. And that's at bravemasters.com/YouTube. So
very cool.
subscribe there.
Yes. And while you're subscribing on Jenna's channel, also subscribe on our channel too. There
Yes.
you go. Woohoo! I'm Leisa Reid, and I'll get that figured out.
One bird. What's that thing?
Lots of birds, just one stone. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Jena, for being on our show. I think this has been really valuable. I know it's going to probably change several people's lives, and which is what we're all about, right? It's like,
that's right.
Bring that consciousness to our society, our planet, all of our fellow humans.
Yes.
And I have one more question for you.
Sure.
The show's called Rock Your Talk, so I got to ask, what is one of your favorite rock bands or rock singers of all time?
Oh goodness.
I'm sure you have got lots.
I do. I'm not one of those that has a fave, I like this genre and this genre and this genre. Gosh, it has to be rock.
Yes, that's the only requirement.
That's the only requirement, right? So interesting.
Jenna's from Texas, so maybe.
Do what?
You're from Texas. Are you like country? Is that what it? I don't know.
I'm not. I actually.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
I'm probably more pop and
okay.
But so I'll just go with an oldie but goodie, because I always go back and listen to some of my 80s, 90s stuff. I absolutely adore Pat Benatar.
Oh yeah, she's a rocker. That's right.
I'm aging myself now.
No, not at all. I mean, I love Elvis Presley. So, I love all.
There you go.
Same thing. I have tons every genre or every decade. I have my favorites. But,
yes, me too.
There's not a lot of women rockers out there who, especially, now there are more. But it was a tough to break in. That when.
Yeah.
In the time. So yes, Pat Benatar, she definitely knows how to rock.
Yeah, awesome. She's an oldie but goodie.
Oh, fun. Well, everyone enjoy your favorite rock music. And while you're doing that, make sure you're kind to yourself today and to somebody else too. We'll see you on the next episode of Rock Your Talk.
Bye.
Oh. What did I do? Oopsies. Bye, everybody.